All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely massive question. Just how much do people actually earn in the UK? We're going to go on a bit of a journey here, starting from the absolute average all the way up to the seriously rich. And honestly, by the end of this, the data is going to completely reframe how you look at your own bank account. We've got some truly fascinating numbers coming up that reveal what people really earn and own in this country. So let's jump right in. So, let me ask you a very direct, maybe even slightly visceral question. And answer it honestly, out loud if you want to. Are you rich? If you're anything like, well, almost everyone else in Britain, you probably just said no, without even hesitating. And you know what? The data completely backs up your gut reaction. In this country, fewer than 1% of people would ever describe themselves as upper class. We're fundamentally a nation of people who kind of constantly feel skint, right? Like we're always just one bad month away from the edge. But here's the slightly uncomfortable truth hiding in the data. A huge number of you engaging with this explainer right now are far, far closer to the top than you've ever allowed yourself to believe. You've just never seen the actual numbers.
Okay, let's dive into this. Before we start climbing the wealth ladder, we need to establish one critical tool. We have to untangle two words that newspapers absolutely love to smudge together: average and median. Getting these two confused is exactly how people end up feeling poor for literally no reason. See, the average, or the mean, is what you get when you take every single salary in the entire country, add them all together, and divide by the number of workers. Sounds perfectly fair, right? But it's not. Why? Because a tiny handful of hedge fund managers in the city on just enormous financial packages quietly drag that average way up for everybody else. The median, on the other hand, well, that's an honest line. If you lined up every single worker in Britain from the lowest paid on the left to the highest paid on the right, the median is simply the person standing in the dead center. It is the absolute truest, most accurate picture of a normal, ordinary life.
So let's go meet that person standing right in the middle. The median full-time worker in the UK here in 2026 earns roughly £37,000 a year. I want you to just sit with that number for a second, really let it sink in, because what this fundamentally means is that exactly half of the entire country, every full-time worker, earns less than that number. Not more, less. Now look at the distortion between those two numbers. The average, the mean we talked about, sits much higher at around £45,000. And that £8,000 gap between the 37K median and the 45K mean, well, that gap is essentially the City of London. It's the bankers, the corporate lawyers, the tech founders, all of them pulling that national average up and totally away from the reality that most people actually live. So here is your first major reframe of this explainer. If you're sitting there earning, say, £40,000 a year and feeling like you're only just keeping your head above water, you are not behind. You're actually quietly out-earning the majority of the population. You just never got the memo. All right, let's climb the ladder to rung 2, the top 10%. To join this club, the professional class, as a single individual, you need to be pulling in around £80,000 a year. As a household, so two earners pooling their income together, that line sits a bit higher at roughly £135,000. Picture this demographic, right? Maybe a senior teacher married to a project manager living somewhere in the home counties driving a sensible car. On paper, statistically, they are definitively a top 10% household. But here's the paradox, and it's just so fascinating to me. These people almost never feel rich. In real life, they feel completely and utterly squeezed. So the crucial point here is understanding exactly why they feel that way. This is where the whole squeeze middle concept really bites down hard. Just look at the outgoings stacking up against them. They're likely carrying a mortgage at around 5%. They're paying a council tax bill that seems to relentlessly climb every single year. Income tax and national insurance take a massive bite before the money even lands in their checking account. And the moment their pay crept over 60 grand, HMRC quietly began clawing back their child benefit, which is completely gone by the time they hit 80,000. Oh, and it gets worse because tax thresholds have been frozen for years. We call this fiscal drag, and let me tell you, it is the stealthiest tax of them all. More and more of their hard-won pay is just being swallowed whole by the 40% tax bracket. So, yeah, they earn like the top 10%, but they're lying awake at night worrying exactly like everyone else. Let's move to and see how this builds. Because as we keep climbing, you'll notice the air starts to get very, very thin. The top 5% of individuals in this country earn somewhere around £110,000 a year. And to reach the absolute pinnacle, the top 1%, and stand there alone on your own 2 feet as an individual, you need roughly £185,000 a year. We are in incredibly rare territory now. And let me paint you the rarest picture of all.
Imagine a household where a GP is married to a senior lawyer. Put their incomes together and they can comfortably clear the household's top 1% threshold, which sits at an absolutely astonishing £400,000 a year. That is extraordinary money by literally any measure. And yet, and this is the vital concept that almost nobody actually stops to understand, they are still fundamentally just salary earners. They wake up in the morning and they trade their hours for money. Brilliant, well-paid, highly skilled hours? Absolutely, but hours all the same. If they stopped working tomorrow, the income stops dead right along with them. For all that massive income, they're running on exactly the same treadmill as the median worker on 37 grand. Their treadmill is just moving a heck of a lot faster.
Which brings us to the grand cinematic revelation of this entire explainer. We really need to talk about the fundamental difference between the tap and the lake. See, income is just a tap. It's the water flowing in, it's the speed of your treadmill. But wealth, real, durable wealth, that is the lake. It's what you've actually collected, what you've kept, and what you let sit. Honestly, once you truly understand the profound difference between the tap and the lake, pretty much everything you thought you knew about who is actually rich in this country completely falls apart. Let's contrast two vastly different lives to see how this works in practice. Take a high-earning Londoner pulling in £150,000 a year. They have a massive tap, an enormous flow of cash. But they rent a flat that costs an absolute fortune, they spend heavily, they commute expensively, and at the end of every single month, there is almost nothing left in their lake. Now on the flip side, picture a retired postman in Yorkshire. He hasn't earned a serious salary in years. His tap is barely trickling at this point. But look at the postman's lake. He owns his 4-bedroom house outright, for has not a single penny of mortgage left on it. And sitting quietly inside his SIP, his self-invested personal pension, is very nearly £1 million, silently accumulated over decades of time. So ask yourself honestly, as you think about these assets, who is actually rich here? The Londoner is earning? Absolutely. But the postman is wealthy. And those two things are for sure not the same. Let's zoom out a bit and look at the lake for the whole country. The median UK household, again, that's the one standing dead in the middle, holds total wealth of around £300,000. And crucially, that figure includes their property and their pensions, not just the cash sitting in a current account. That is the real measure of Britain, folks. It's the pile, not just the payslip. And notice what this data point does. It completely scrambles the wealth league tables. And this brilliantly illustrates our societal blind spot. The person who quietly overpaid their mortgage for 20 years, or who fed just a little more into their pension every single month, has been filling a massive lake silently and invisibly. Meanwhile, their loud, high-earning neighbor was busy running an enormous tap straight down the drain. We falsely compare ourselves to the loud spending because, well, nobody films a TikTok of their paid-off mortgage, right? We never see the quiet lake. We only ever see the loud tap. Now for the ultimate statistical reality check. And I want to genuinely stop you in your tracks here. The cost of living headlines and the economic pain out there are very real, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. But Britain, taken as a whole, sits right at the very top tier of global wealth. If you own your home and you have a private pension quietly compounding away in the background, whether that's a workplace scheme, an ISA, or a SIP, then you, watching this right now, are wealthier than roughly 95% of every single person alive on this planet. Let that incredible number land. 95% no way, right? But it's true. So where does all of this data actually leave us? Well, it turns out that wealth is a moving target. And the single biggest mistake we make, every single one of us, is that we view wealth through the completely wrong lens. We compare ourselves to our street. We measure ourselves against the shiny new car on the drive next door, or our colleagues' lavish holiday photos on Instagram. We constantly measure ourselves against the people right next to us. We almost never step back and compare ourselves to the actual Office for National Statistics data. If we did, that data would quietly tell us that, relatively speaking, we are doing just fine. Which brings us to a final profound thought to close out our explainer today. True wealth was never really about the number printed on your payslip. True wealth is the quiet, powerful gap between your income and your ego. As we wrap up this journey, think about how you can close that gap in your own life. Stop looking at the tap, start focusing on the lake, and you might just realize that you are actually rich all along. Thanks so much for learning with me today.